You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio once again. Man, we are here again. We have another show. We have a big show today because, man, we all hear about e-commerce. We don't always know what that means because sometimes we're just going on social media trying to figure out ourselves. But today we have an expert. Today we have the honor talking to John Chan, and today's topic is scaling e-commerce businesses through digital marketing. If you don't know what marketing is, please don't YouTube it because we have someone who's been doing this for a good long time and he has a very impressive resume. So first and foremost, John, I know you're swamped, but thank you for taking time. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Shamaya. Thanks for having me.
So I appreciate your time. You know about this stuff. I mean, we all hear about software as a service. I'm going to ask you a little bit about that in the beginning. What does that actually mean? But before I do that, kind of give the audience a little bit part of your portfolio, all the great things you've been able to do in your world of marketing.
For sure, man. Thanks for that introduction. I mean, I've been doing this for close to 20 years now. So I started coding in high school. I was kind of like a nerdy kid. And but the thing that set me sort of in this direction was that I dropped out of school when I was 19 studying fine arts. I was disenchanted. But when I left school, I started freelancing and want to get into business through like a chance encounter reading this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, that sort of set me in this direction of like wanting to start my own business. But it wasn't really that kind of clear at the time. I just wanted to be good at what I do, wanted to learn a lot of different things. And so when I spent maybe 9 months or so building my first business, I realized very quickly that even if I had the technical skills, I had a lot of things in life and in the world that I hadn't really learned. And so through maybe like freelancing for a few months, I ended up actually being hired at the university that I left, University of British Columbia out in Vancouver, Canada. And from there, I really sort of like honed my skill sets around being a good web developer, a user experience designer. And I was doing things like setting up research labs and doing all kinds of things that made the organization better. But fast forward a few years after I kind of ran its course doing web design and web development, I left that university trying to figure out my next thing, thinking I was going to go back to consulting or freelancing because I kind of kept that in my back pocket. But that didn't last very long as well, because maybe another few months in and taking on a few clients, I got hired at a company called 37 Signals, who are the producers of a software called Basecamp. And those guys within the web development industry are very well known for two things. One is that they started one of the earlier sort of software companies for selling digital software and project management systems back in the early 2000s, and they really pioneered that. But they're also really well known for being champions of remote work. So right now, post-pandemic, it's a lot more common for people to work from home or those type of things. But they're doing this since like the early 2000s. And it's talked about how they set up company cultures and structures and those type of things. They really sort of like spearhead that type of thing and wrote books behind it. But they're also well known for a third thing, which was they invented a coding language called Ruby on Rails. And so you look at products like Twitter or a lot of software companies that are built on this sort of backbone layer. And so they had all this clout, and I was this young kid that just happened to join them and got exposed to all kinds of really wonderful experiences along the way. Fast forward a few years, when that ran its course, I came back home from Chicago to Vancouver, thinking I was going to go back to either consulting or maybe now with a new set of coding skills, I was going to start a software company, only to realize that writing software was actually very hard to learn on your own for whatever reasons that I won't get into. And so one of the clever things that I was doing as I was building like a side hustle on doing a software company and trying to teach myself how to code was I joined a local coding boot camp as a TA, basically to help guide new students learning how to code. So coding boot camps, if you haven't come across them, there are these programs that fast track somebody that is new to the tech industry to go from zero coding experience to being a decent junior programmer within 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the structure of the program. And I joined as a TA largely because I wanted to get access to curriculum. I didn't want to pay for it, but it exposed me to the repetition of just the continuous practice of being a good software developer, at least the fundamentals. And that really set the tone for, going back to building my own product company. That also ran for a few years. And so, when that ran its course after a few more years, this is 2016, 2017 or so, when we built a product that a lot of people used, but we couldn't commercialize, I at the time thought to myself and my wife who I work with, we thought that we weren't really good at marketing or user acquisition, the field that we needed. And so we started hosting meetup groups and inviting all these experts to come speak to us. And again, so I can learn and I can get connected, only to realize that, hey, we actually weren't half bad ourselves. And that kind of turned into like the third arc sort of the career where I started being a professional marketer. First started by doing small projects, doing design optimizations and doing types of like redesigns of web development to managing large scale campaigns. And so fast forward to today, maybe like 15, like 20 years into the career, I've had three major arcs where I spent a good chunk of the first early years doing web design and user experience design and research, to writing software for a bit, for a few more years. And then now coming to the third part, which is running marketing campaigns for, 7 to 8 figure $1 billion brands that are, selling on digitally online. And it could be things for products related to travel, to products that you sell on Shopify online, things that are some, for a lot of us, might seem very elusive, but it's very, very comfortable for us. That's kind of the arc.
When you look at the experience that you took, I mean, starting out young, I mean, you took a non-traditional route and you end up still successful. What are some of the things that you believed that you had in you that allowed you to sustain every chapter of your journey being able to succeed forward? Because someone who drops out of college, I mean, we don't always hear about, those type of stories. And I think that's very unique for you.
For sure. I mean, I appreciate that question a lot because you're right. There has to be some driving force behind each of those transitions, because looking ahead before you make the transition, it'll feel really scary. And rightfully so. There's a lot of unknowns. But I think, the answer changes for each sort of like period. But when I was young, when I didn't have a lot of things going for me, the things I learned was all the coding skills I had from high school, which wasn't a lot really. But the biggest question that kind of kept me going and that kept going me for many years afterwards was, what's the worst that could happen? And when you play out sort of the scenarios of, well, if things didn't work out or if things didn't back out, I would just go back to school, right? Or if I, were to transition and move away from a stable job, how much time do I have before I have the skill sets to find my next job? And I think kind of playing out those worst case scenarios, it made me find solace in that, the upsides of not making that transition, the things that are available to me was far greater than me staying put. And, that kind of energy helped with risk tolerance, and it changes throughout the decades and throughout the years, right? I don't have the same risk tolerance as I did in my early 20s. But at the same time, the other thing that kept me going was when I look at how fast the internet or the world was moving, staying put also meant that I was falling behind. At least I felt that sense of urgency, right? You look at tools today like AI that has been coming out for the last, 18, 20 months or so. And if you look at the advent of the internet, being popularized 20 years ago, what's the cost of not doing something about it, right? And for me, that was always been greater. And so I've had people tell me that, oh, John, this seems like a very courageous thing to do. And I'm like, no, it actually wasn't a courageous thing to do. It didn't seem like a courageous thing to do. It just seemed like the least risky thing to do in my head as I was about to make those jumps, as I was doing those kind of cost benefit analysis. And I look back over the years, more often than not, it was the right call, but it was very hard to predict that moving forward. But that's the kind of part that I think it's important to make that kind of conviction of making those judgment calls as you're evaluating what is the cost of staying put.
And not to be off topic, I just had this pop in my head and I thought, because when you think about how people have that type of reaction on the outside looking in, like, wow, how did you do this? Or wow, that must have been some deep spiritual situation that you just, you nailed it on the T. Because we kind of have that reaction. Like if we're on social media and we're watching our favorite basketball team, baseball team, whatever, and someone just does this top play and they kind of been doing it for years and they kind of been getting championships and they kind of been breaking records and we know they're on the way to some Hall of Fame, had to catch my breath. It's kind of crazy on the outside looking in because we're like, man, how did that person do that. They make it look easy. But what we don't do, what we're doing right now, is peel back the layers of time. And it's funny, we talked about it before you even started the show, like where we are in our life, it is based on how we move, how we are choosing our next way to move. And I want you to kind of explore that, because it's going to lead into more into today's topic, scaling e-commerce business through digital marketing, because it's my feeling is kind of like when we do marketing or advertising or however we get the word out of our brand, success is kind of like peel back in those layers of the early beginnings.
That's right. And I think if you get into any field, whether if it's design or marketing or software or, or sports, everything sort of boils down to a few fundamentals. And so I think if you understand the mechanics or the fundamentals of what it really means to do X, it's not so scary. And so you're right, because when you look at, somebody do something really impressive 5 years in, 10 years in, you're looking at a finished product 10 years in, right? But 10 years ago, when you look back at what they did to get started, it didn't look that impressive. But that's how all things start. And so I think if you recognize, or if you just take the time to review that, or even just ask, a lot of times we should spend less time focusing on what it looks like at year 10, because sometimes that's very daunting. But if you go back and said, hey, what did it look like when they're starting out? And you realize how, amateurish or, not daunting of that, the thing that they started, you realize a lot of us actually have that available to us all along, but most of it just never got started.
Listen, I'm Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, John Chan. You can go follow him on social media, LinkedIn, X, I still call it Twitter because I'm a millennial, and Instagram. You can follow him on Instagram. It is JTC Chan. Real easy to find him. Today's topic, scaling e-commerce business through digital marketing. So let's get into that part where I know people are like, man, let's get to it. So when it comes to scaling, someone who out there who kind of knows a little bit about how to run ads or just, build that e-commerce business, from your experience, man, what are some common mistakes that e-commerce businesses out there are making when it comes to paid advertising, and how can they kind of fine tune that root problem that could be causing them to not have any conversions?
100%. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is fundamentals. And so marketing has two fundamentals, at least paid advertising has two fundamentals that it's really important to understand. And the first one is basically you have to know how to do basic math in terms of how do you calculate what's called the unit economics of what is a successful campaign. And so before we get into like the breakdowns, fundamentally running advertising online in any business, whether it's a software company that you're trying to promote or a physical product that you're trying to sell online, or even offline, if you're, running a brick and mortar store and you're trying to sell something at a retail store, every dollar of advertising that you spend has to get you something back. And there's transitions and things that you have to do in between, but you're just trying to find out, if I spend $1 in advertising, can I make $3 back? Can I make $5 back? Can I make $10 back? And if I can't, can I get information or data or learnings that helps me transition towards making a $3 back or $5 back? And some aspect of it is not within your control, like how much the ad platforms charge you. That's outside of your control. But the things that are within your control are being able to measure things properly, being able to understand within your business what is the cost requirements in order for you to hit a profitability. So basics is, you have to spend $1 to make $3 or spend $1 to make $5. But the next thing is understanding that $3 or $5 in sales that you get, not all of it is going to be net profits. So you're going to have to figure out what is your cost of goods sold, what is your cost of fulfillment, what is your cost of your credit card fees, and all those type of things that goes into a single unit of production. You calculate all that, and then you work backwards and say, okay, in order for me to, make 50 cents or $1 for every dollar spent, I need to make $3 in total sales or $5 in total sales. That formulaic sort of understanding of how to do marketing is sort of the first fundamentals. And then the second thing is that when you think about any form of marketing, it doesn't matter if it's digital advertising or if it's, offline advertising that you run, on a billboard or what have you, marketing is sales at scale. Meaning, if you can't convince somebody one-on-one in person why they should buy a particular product or service from you because it's not fundamentally better for the consumer or the purchaser at the end of the day, then why are you able to sell anything online? You can't. But if you can figure that out, all you have to do is just figure out what made someone convinced that, you know what, this is such an amazing product or service that I should buy it or I need to buy it right now. And all you have to do is take that messaging and have it discoverable or shown in a form of a Google ad or in the form of an Instagram ad or in the form of a web page that somebody reads. You're just walking them through the buyer's journey that they had to go through in order for them to being not knowing anything about a product or service to being fully convinced by the end of it that, you know what, I need this thing right now. And we've all experienced that. All of us are consumers in some way, shape, or form. So it's a matter of paying attention to what's happening within our own psychology that made us tick, that we then translate into a marketing campaign. So between those two things, the art of understanding how to sell something en masse, sales at scale, versus having the basic formulaic sort of understanding that marketing and digital advertising's job is to put $1 in to get $3 or $5 or $10 back. Those two things will carry you through a lot of the groundwork for how to build and scale any type of business online.
You having an insider approach, knowing what is working and trending in the e-commerce business world, especially through digital marketing. What are some of the things that you're seeing as far as maybe just principles? Because every brand is different, obviously, but what are set core principles that you feel are separating the two of brand A that's very successful and scaling consistently versus brand B that seems to plateau or, God forbid, is sinking sand?
Sure. Well, the two things I would say, and it's not necessarily a trend because those things can come and go, but there's certain fundamentals, again, that basically are timeless, which is you better be selling a product or service that people actually genuinely want, right? There's no level of marketing or tactics or growth hacks that can get around a bad product or bad service. And so when you start with something that people genuinely want and need, but just few know about, or it's not communicated well, marketing comes in and becomes very effective because all you're doing is just you're translating and you're telling the story or narrative better because more people have to understand it when they otherwise would not have been able to. And so the number one rule of marketing has nothing to do with marketing per se. It's actually just have a great product or service because you can't fix that with marketing. You can't put lipstick on a pig, so to speak, right? And so I think a lot of people, when they have that and they have conviction behind that, the next part when they want to know, when they know that marketing is sort of limiting factor, is where they get stuck. And I think that's the second part to it, which is once you know you have a product or service that people generally want and need, the next thing is you have to be clear and compelling. Clear, concise, and compelling. Meaning, oftentimes, especially this happens with, if you run a business on your own out there's some product services are very intuitive and easy to understand, right? Oh, you go to a barber, we're here to get a haircut. If you go to, somewhere else, you're buying, a pair of socks or whatever, right? You know what the physical product is. But for a lot of people, they don't know how to communicate the whys of why someone would buy. So it's like, if you ask, like, what is it that someone bought a pair of socks for? Or what are the driving factors behind it? Those can get a little more confusing for people. And so the best way to really uncover that is to just peel back from all the previous customers that have already purchased your product or service. What are they really buying, right? Are they buying something that because they have the direct want or need, or is there something behind it? And so as you can uncover what is behind the motivations, those becomes the groundwork for the types of angles that you can develop in your messaging. It can help with, is it that there's a underlying want or need beyond the physical thing that people can physically see or understand. Driving that message home is usually the second layer that a lot of people generally miss because they're not sensitive to it or that they're too close to the problem and they don't know how to get rid of that jargon or language that they're so accustomed to, but that the end consumer doesn't fully understand.
When it comes to you having experience in managing different clients' needs for, revenue, you have a very strong record of that, talking about millions of impact dollars there. So when you see someone that they've been in the industry for a while, so they're not, worried about some of the basics, but they're more so worried about how to continue their legacy and their growth. What are some common ingredients that you see people who are veterans at this, that they seem to really have polish versus someone who just gets started and they're extremely frustrated. I have attempted idea of what you're going to answer, but I'd just like you to test that for our audience.
No, for sure. I appreciate that. I think the things that separates, quote unquote, the veterans and the people that have been in industry and have done really well, have made billions for themselves. Sometimes it's because they've got something that carried them through to building millions. Sometimes it's dumb luck and it's accidental. And I think that was one of the surprising things about, I mentioned in my story that in the first 2 phases of us building our businesses, we thought we weren't good at marketing. And when we started taking on clients in 2017, 2018 or so, we noticed that companies that had millions of dollars behind them that were doing a lot of sales sometimes were led by companies that didn't fully understand marketing themselves. And that was very surprising. And so going back to the point about picking a product or service that is, very, very desperately wanted or needed, sometimes being in the right market or catching the right timing of something is more crucial than being good alone. Because we thought, it was all about skill and we want to attribute it to the success of the entrepreneur and all this type of things. And that's definitely a factor. But being in the right time, in the right place, with the right product, the right market, and the right price point, there are a lot of external factors that's beyond what the entrepreneur or founder can control. And so I think that's sometimes misunderstood or overlooked. And that was something that's very surprising for me. That said, once they do, every one of them that have built millions of dollars have found one thing that worked for them and they just kept doing it. They kept exploiting it. And so for some people, between, let's say 2012 to 2018, it was a fantastic time to run Facebook ads because not a lot of competing partners were on Facebook ads, selling digital products or physical products online. And so at the time, the auctions for running advertising campaigns were fairly cheap. And so if you caught a moment in time where that worked, you'll see that a lot of companies through that sort of big phase and that sort of get them the initial sort of traction and then evolve into the next thing, which is, maybe figuring out a secondary channel or third option for how they get net new sales. But every one of them, let's call it the first $3 to $5 million or so, they all have found one formula where they could find new entrants and quotes and leads for their business and prospects. And they're able to provide an offer that was very compelling that, both sides was very happy to make that trade. And then they were able to do that long enough for them to have, oh, shoot, I have millions in the bank now. What to do next, right? There's usually some form of that get into the first phase before they transition to the next.
And for our listeners who are listening, we're talking to our guest, John Chan, and the topic of scaling e-commerce businesses through digital marketing. And this is like a masterclass for digital marketing brands, period. And you as a former athlete, because I know in your bio it says former athlete, you also have the unique perspective of what it's like to basically go the non-traditional way. So many of us have chosen to go to college and get that education, and that's okay. And people like yourself chose a different route, and that's okay. How important is it for a person to understand that the path they choose is their unique path, and they don't necessarily need to try to copy someone else's journey?
See, I love that because a lot of us, as we try to figure out what we should do, especially the big decisions of life, is we look around. What's that person doing, or what's this person doing, or what's my mom or dad saying, or what's whatever else. There's a lot of external pressure, and frankly, it's natural to have that kind of pressure because everybody wants to tell you what you should do. But it's very hard, and it takes a long time for us to introspect and uncover what we really want, what is really right for me, and it is a very difficult journey, but it's also a very important journey. And the way to think about why it's important to uncover that value for yourself and who you really are largely comes down to when you think about, for example, let's go with hiring, right? Let's say you're applying for a job, right? You apply for a particular role. There's 100 applicants within that, applying for the same role. How are you going to stand out? And so when you look at things like, well, I have years of experience, or I have this particular education, that might narrow you down to the top 30th percentile. You know what? Okay, all the people that have experience gets weeded out. And then you have the next, section of people to weed out. And you're all the people that have a particular degree or whatever experience, that's another sort of group. And then you're whittling down to the last 5 or 10 or 12, right? It's within that group, how do you stand out? And then you start having to dig deep into like, well, what makes you unique? Why is it that not anyone can get this job, but why should it be you specifically? And if you could find a way to tie all your personal experiences, maybe there's something about you being, the oldest in your family. Maybe if you're like an older sibling and you got young ones to take care of, that might set you in a very unique experience that makes you unique within that setting. Or if you went to sports, right? Maybe you played team sports. Maybe you played music. Maybe you did, maybe you played video games growing up, right? Maybe there's some aspects of very obscure sort of like skill sets that made you think about problems or approaches in a different way. So that on the hiring side, let's say you're hiring for, a designer, or you're hiring for an accountant or whatever, right? It's like there's all these people that everybody could do. Been in the game long enough to have these experiences, got the degree, get the credentials, whatever, right? But the ones that have a unique set of, I bring this unique thing to the table because I have this unique strength because I was raised in a certain way, or I come from a different background, or that I was culturally coming from a certain thing that made me particularly good at something, or that, I learned these skills because my mom and dad did this thing when they were doing the work and I picked that skill up from them. That's uniquely you. And so the more you can highlight and shine out all the things that are very easy for you to overlook, that seems normal to you, and you'll realize that it's actually very compelling for somebody else, is why it's really important for you to understand what makes you unique. And in some cases, carve your own unique path, because that's where it all matters at the end.
It's on Refocus Radio. We're talking to our guest today, John Chan. You can find him online on Instagram, X, and LinkedIn at JTC Chan. And man, I can't believe time has gone by so fast. But in wrapping up today's topic, scaling e-commerce businesses through digital marketing. If someone out there wants to learn more from you, if you have additional resources or any materials, products, services that someone can tap into, how can they best way find that out?
Best way to look for us is to look up our agency. We're at 2x.agency. That's the URL. So that's 2, the letter X, dot, the number 2, letter X, dot agency. You'll find us up and you'll be able to see all kinds of product and services that we sold in the past and some example work that we've shown. And basically, if you got a business that you're running online, just book a call. It's a free chat, and they'll love to talk to you, learn more about your business and how we could potentially help. I think that's the best way to reach out.
Well, like I always want to say to you, John, thank you for your time, man.
Shamaya, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.